It was all that thing. But I snuck in, performed, got a standing ovation. And,
Really?
Yeah, he said, you can come back, but just don't drink. You can come back.
Sure.
For years, Chris Tucker was among the people allowed close enough to see Michael Jackson without the stage lights, headlines, or rumors getting in the way. Their friendship was filled with laughter, private moments, courtroom loyalty, and memories Chris still guards very carefully. But while Michael's world was falling apart, Chris was facing turning points. Hollywood success, huge paychecks, sudden distance, tax trouble, faith, and personal loss all reshaped the man audiences thought they knew. So what did Chris see during Michael's darkest years? Why did he stay when others stepped back? And what has he refused to say even now? Join us as we uncover the friendship, the silence, and the truth hidden between everything Chris Tucker has revealed and everything he has chosen to protect. Before Hollywood, Chris Tucker had one secret weapon. Christopher Tucker entered the world in Atlanta on August 31, 1971. He was the youngest son of Mary Louise and Norris Tucker, and he grew up as one of 6 children. In a house that busy, being noticed was not always easy. Chris found his way through humor. He learned that a joke could pull attention toward him at home, and the same trick worked at school. His father ran his own janitorial service, so Chris grew up watching hard work up close. The family also lived by strong Pentecostal Christian beliefs. His parents belonged to the Church of God in Christ, and faith became part of the way he understood right, wrong, and responsibility. That influence would matter much later, when huge movie offers began testing what he was willing to accept. For now, though, Chris was simply the funny kid from Decatur, Georgia. Teachers and classmates remembered how easily he could make a room laugh. He copied voices, faces, and movements. Eddie Murphy was one of his biggest influences. Richard Pryor was another. But there was one performer Chris kept returning to long before they ever met. He loved doing Michael Jackson impressions. He copied the voice, the dance steps, and the sharp stage movements that made Michael impossible to ignore. At that time, Michael was still a distant superstar. Chris could not have known that the man he imitated in school would one day become one of his closest friends. After graduating from Columbia High School, Chris decided that making people laugh could become more than a talent. He wanted a real career. That meant leaving Georgia and taking a chance in Los Angeles. The move was risky, but his confidence was already growing. He had spent years learning how to hold attention. Now he wanted to find out whether he could do it in front of strangers who had no reason to care. That choice opened the first door, but Hollywood would soon show him how quickly one small opening could become a life he never expected. How Chris Tucker fought his way into Hollywood. Before Los Angeles fully knew his name, Chris worked the local comedy clubs around Atlanta. He tested jokes, sharpened his timing, and learned how to control a crowd. In 1990, he made the move west and began chasing stand-up full-time. What he had was speed. His voice could rise, fall, and explode in seconds. His body moved with the joke. Even when he stood still, his eyes and expressions carried the moment. By 1992, that energy helped him become a frequent performer on HBO's Def Comedy Jam. The show gave rising black comedians a national audience, and Chris fit the stage perfectly. He did not sound like anyone else. His Southern background gave his delivery a different rhythm, while his impressions made every story feel larger. Viewers could see the influence of Murphy and Pryor, but they could also see Chris becoming his own performer. In 1994, he made his movie debut in House Party 3. A year later came the role that changed everything. Chris played Smokey in Friday beside Ice Cube. He was paid only a small amount compared with the fortunes he would later earn. But the role gave him something more important at that stage. It gave him a character people remembered. Smokey was loud, nervous, reckless, and endlessly funny. Chris stole scenes with his voice, his movements, and the feeling that anything could happen when he appeared. More roles followed. He appeared in Panther and Dead Presidents, which helped build his place with black audiences. Then he reached wider movie crowds through The Fifth Element, Money Talks, and Jackie Brown. These films were very different from one another, but they proved Chris could work in comedy, action, science fiction, and crime stories without losing his identity. He was no longer just a club comic who had landed a lucky role. He had become a rising movie star. Still, one film would take everything people liked about him and turn it into a worldwide success. It would also connect him with another performer whose friendship would last for decades. When Rush Hour changed his life forever. In 1998, Chris Tucker joined Jackie Chan in Rush Hour. Chris played LAPD detective James Carter, a man who talked fast, acted first, and rarely believed he was wrong. Jackie played Inspector Lee, who was calmer, quieter, and far more controlled. Their difference became the heart of the film. Chris filled every silence, while Jackie often answered with a look or a pause. Years later, Jackie admitted that during filming he sometimes had not a clue what Chris was saying. Chris spoke so quickly that Jackie's dialogue coach had to sit behind the camera and help explain what had just happened. That real confusion added another layer to the famous joke about understanding the words coming out of Carter's mouth. The film became a major success and earned about $244.7 million worldwide. It also turned Chris and Jackie into one of the most recognizable comedy teams of the late 1990s. The second film raised the stakes. Rush Hour 2 became another major hit, and Chris earned around $20 million. He later joked that even that amount did not seem so huge when the movie made hundreds of millions around the world. By the time Rush Hour 3 arrived in 2007, he had enough power to demand $25 million and a share of the film's gross. That deal helped make him the highest-paid actor in Hollywood at the time. Yet success brought frustration, too. Chris later said the third film could have been better. He felt that people stopped letting him create freely and started handing him instructions on how to be funny. As he put it, "Y'all done messed this whole thing up." Jackie was also harder on the third film, saying it had too much money and too much time. For Chris, though, Rush Hour created more than fame. It gave him money, power, and the freedom to choose what came next. That freedom led to a decision many people still misunderstand. Just as Hollywood expected him to accept every offer, Chris began moving in the opposite direction. The $12 million role Chris refused to take. His retreat did not begin after Rush Hour 3. Signs had appeared earlier, while his name carried real value. One of the clearest examples came after Friday. Ice Cube later said the team was ready to offer Chris between $10 million and $12 million to return as Smokey in Next Friday. Chris refused. The choice was tied to his Christian faith and to the kind of image he no longer wanted to promote. He did not want to keep playing a character built around smoking marijuana and using heavy profanity. He said, "I don't want to represent everybody smoking weed." Walking away from that money pushed him toward a different phase. He became more selective and changed the way he approached comedy. In 2014, he explained that faith made stand-up harder, but also more rewarding. Many comedians could reach for easy shock value, dirty jokes, or harsh language. Chris felt he had to dig deeper and still find a way to be funny. He liked that challenge. He also said he was not interested in tearing people apart just to get laughs. Even when discussing Donald Trump in 2018, Chris said he prayed that the president would do the right thing. Years later, Chris described his bigger reason for leaving Hollywood. After reaching the top, he felt he had hit a ceiling. Money and status were no longer enough. He traveled, lived outside the movie business, and became involved in humanitarian work. Those experiences changed his view. He began thinking less about being the biggest comic in the world and more about becoming someone who could give something back. The pause also gave him more time with his son, Destin, from his marriage to Asia Pryor. Chris and Asia were married for 6 years before the marriage ended in 2003. Destin later studied cinema, television, and emerging media at Morehouse College and graduated with honors. Chris kept much of his romantic life private after the divorce, dividing his time between Los Angeles, Las Vegas, and Atlanta. Yet while Chris was choosing a life beyond constant fame, a friendship had already started changing him in private. The private jet that led to Michael. Michael Jackson was no longer just the distant star he had admired as a boy, but reaching him for their first meeting still required an expensive and determined gamble. The two were moving within the same entertainment world, but meeting Michael was not simple. Chris would soon prove how badly he wanted that first conversation, and it began with an expensive gamble. Chris later told GQ that he flew to New York and waited for 2 days, hoping Michael would meet him. No call came. Chris finally gave up and took a private jet back to Los Angeles. The timing could not have been worse. As soon as he landed, he received a message saying Michael wanted to meet him the next morning. Chris was still on the plane. He went straight to the captain and offered to pay whatever it took to fly back to New York. That decision began a friendship that grew between the late 1990s and early 2000s. Chris spent time at Neverland and came to know Michael through visits, shared jokes, and ordinary moments away from cameras. Michael loved the way Chris talked and laughed at his country sound. Chris said one of his greatest moments was making Michael laugh without even trying. The laughter came so easily that Chris sometimes did not understand what he had done. Michael also changed Chris's name for his own amusement. He began calling him Christmas. Chris was confused until Michael explained that Chris Tucker sounded like Christmas and that it was beautiful. Their friendship was filled with those small, odd moments. Chris joked that he was too scared to play tricks on Michael because he did not want to be thrown out of Neverland. Chris had entered a world almost no one understood. Around Michael, normal activities became secret missions. Going to a movie meant Michael arriving dressed in black like a ninja, slipping into the theater just before the film began, and suddenly appearing beside Chris. Shopping in Las Vegas became chaos when crowds pushed Chris aside and mistook him for security. Those memories showed why Michael trusted him. Chris did not approach him only as a legend. He gave him something rare, a friendship where laughter could briefly make fame feel normal. When Michael could not stop laughing. Their bond soon became public. Chris appeared in Michael Jackson's 2001 music video for You Rock My World, and the experience captured their chemistry. Michael later said working with Chris was difficult because the moment the director called action, he would start laughing. Chris improvised little movements and faces between takes, and Michael found them impossible to ignore. Michael said Chris's eyes would pop out of his head and called the result very funny. At the 2002 American Music Awards, while accepting the Artist of the Century honor, Michael made his opinion clear by saying, "Chris Tucker, you are the funniest man alive." Chris also introduced and danced with Michael during the singer's 30th anniversary celebration. After seeing Rush Hour 2, Michael called Chris. Chris answered without knowing who was on the line. Michael introduced himself and quickly complained that Chris had copied his dance incorrectly. He told him, "You're kicking with the wrong leg. Stop making me look bad." Even a friendly imitation had to be done properly. Michael also encouraged Chris to work more. He would tell him, "Let's make history. We want to see more of you, Chris. What are you doing?" That advice carried weight because Michael knew the cost of fame better than almost anyone. Chris had stepped away from Hollywood because he wanted a wider life. Still, Michael clearly believed Chris's talent belonged in front of audiences again. Chris, in return, protected the friendship. He shared funny memories, but refused to turn private moments into gossip. One writer later noted that Chris would not reveal much beyond harmless stories, even after Michael's death. That silence became important because their friendship soon moved into much darker territory. Michael's life was no longer being discussed only through music, videos, or jokes. By 2003, a new criminal case had begun. The media storm grew quickly, and many people around Michael faced a choice. They could distance themselves and protect their careers, or they could step forward. Chris had already seen one family at the center of the case from a much closer position than most people realized. The warning Chris gave before the trial. The 2005 case against Michael Jackson grew after the documentary Living with Michael Jackson showed him holding hands with Gavin Arvizo and discussing his practice of sharing his bed with children. Authorities opened an investigation, and Michael was later charged with several serious crimes. The accusations included molesting a minor, giving a minor alcohol, attempted molestation, and conspiring to hold the Arvizo family captive while committing extortion and child abduction. The trial began with jury selection on January 31, 2005, in Santa Maria, California. Chris Tucker entered the story because he already knew the Arvizo family. He had felt sorry for them while Gavin was fighting cancer. Chris gave the family money and gifts because he believed they needed help. Over time, however, he became uncomfortable. He felt they expected too much, called him their brother, and began taking advantage of his kindness. Chris later described them as cunning. Most importantly, he said he had warned Michael about them. That warning became a major part of his testimony because it challenged the idea that the family had no history of seeking support from celebrities. Other famous witnesses described similar concerns. George Lopez said he had also given the family money during Gavin's illness, but came to believe the father cared too much about money. Jay Leno testified about unusual calls from Gavin and said the praise sounded suspicious. The defense argued that the family had learned how to approach public figures and gain sympathy. Chris was in a difficult position. He had once tried to help, and now he had to explain why that help turned into doubt. Speaking in court meant entering a story that could damage anyone connected to it. Michael's defense lawyer, Tom Mesereau, later said Chris's managers, agents, and lawyers did not want him involved. But Chris made his choice. According to Mesereau, Chris said, "Michael needs us. We're going to be there." It was no longer just a friendship built on jokes and movies. The trial would test whether Chris meant what he had shown in private. Why Chris ignored his advisors and took the stand. When Chris took the stand, the risk became real. He was no longer supporting Michael privately. He was placing his experience into one of the most watched trials of the decade. The defense had a witness who knew the Arvizos before they entered Michael's life and could explain why sympathy turned to serious doubt. Chris stayed within what he knew. He did not try to speak for Michael's life or make claims beyond his own experience. Chris did not claim to know everything about Michael's life. He spoke about what he personally knew, what he had personally seen, and what he had experienced with the family. Other defense witnesses followed the same approach. Macaulay Culkin said he had shared a bed with Michael many times as a child, but had never been molested and had never seen improper behavior. He called claims involving him absolutely ridiculous. Wade Robson also testified at that time that he had stayed in Michael's bedroom and had never been abused, although he changed his position years after Michael's death and filed a lawsuit in 2013. Brett Barnes denied that Michael had touched him improperly and later repeated that denial in 2019. On June 13, 2005, the jury acquitted Michael on every count. The legal victory did not restore his old life. He never returned to live at Neverland Ranch and spent time in Bahrain and Ireland. The trial had damaged him publicly and emotionally, even though the verdict cleared him. Chris stayed close. His decision to testify was remembered as one of the strongest examples of loyalty around Michael during that period. It was also risky. Yet Chris did not build a career out of discussing the case afterward. He did not keep returning to television to sell secrets. Instead, he protected the friendship and went back to his own life. His silence only deepened public curiosity. Many kept waiting for a hidden truth Chris had never claimed to hold. Chris had proven his loyalty when Michael needed him most. 4 years later, that friendship would end suddenly, leaving behind questions, grief, and memories Chris guarded carefully for years. Michael's death left Chris Tucker broken. Michael Jackson died on June 25, 2009, after suffering cardiac arrest. His personal doctor had given him drugs to help him sleep. For Chris Tucker, it was the death of a close friend. He attended Michael's memorial service and the private funeral. The loss deeply devastated him, and he stepped away from the spotlight for a time while trying to process it. Chris did not respond by turning Michael's death into a public performance. He did not rush to reveal private conversations or dramatic final secrets. Instead, his silence showed how personal the grief was. In 2012, 3 years after Michael's death, Chris finally spoke more openly about the bond. He described Michael as a modern-day king and the nicest guy ever. Yet even then, he chose his words carefully. He did not reopen every argument around Michael or offer private stories that could no longer be answered. He stayed with what he had seen and felt as a friend. Chris understood that any detail about Michael could be pulled apart, changed, and turned into a headline. That made restraint part of the way he remembered him. His silence was not empty. It showed that some parts of their friendship remained private, even after the world began asking for more. Chris had already entered court when Michael needed him. After the death, he seemed more interested in protecting the bond than proving how much he knew about it. Chris also continued giving personal tributes on social media. He kept Michael's name connected to warmth instead of scandal. The strongest truth in his words was that the public version of Michael never matched the private man he knew. Chris had seen the pressure around him, defended him in court, and then watched death freeze every rumor in place. He could not change what people believed, but he could refuse to add false drama. Even in grief, he stayed careful. That choice separated him from people who used Michael's name for attention. Yet Chris's life after 2009 was far from calm. But grief was not the only burden following Chris into the next decade. Financial trouble was already building, while earlier choices would later return as public controversy. The tax nightmare behind his Hollywood silence. Some of those problems had actually started many years earlier. In 2002, he traveled on Jeffrey Epstein's plane with Bill Clinton and Kevin Spacey during a humanitarian trip focused on the HIV and AIDS crisis in Africa. The flight was reported publicly that same year, long before Epstein's crimes became widely known. In 2007, Chris bought a 10,000-square-foot mansion in Florida for $6 million. The home included 5 bedrooms, 3 fireplaces, a spa, a pool, an outdoor kitchen, and a pirate-themed basement. But by 2010, reports said he owed the IRS more than $11 million. The housing crash also pushed down the mansion's value, and after he fell behind on the mortgage, he sold it in 2012 for about $1.7 million. In 2014, representatives blamed his tax trouble on poor accounting and business management. A year later, another legal problem appeared when comedian Terry Hodges sued Chris and Netflix over Chris Tucker Live. Hodges said he was owed $66,000 for years of editing, writing, acting, and producing work. Chris's lawyer called the case absurd and completely without merit. The 2002 Epstein flight returned to public attention in the 2020 Netflix series Jeffrey Epstein, Filthy Rich, but the reports did not accuse Chris of taking part in Epstein's crimes. In 2021, the IRS sued him for about $9.6 million in back taxes, penalties, and interest. Chris settled that case in 2023 by agreeing to pay $358 million plus interest. More criticism followed in 2025, when his appearance at the Riyadh Comedy Festival was questioned by Human Rights Watch, which accused Saudi Arabia of using the event to soften attention around its human rights record. That same year, Chris was confirmed to have been listed in Epstein's personal contact book. Yet these setbacks were only one side of his later years. The promise Chris kept after Michael's death. At the same time, Chris was slowly rebuilding his career and reconnecting with Michael's family. The following year, he appeared in Silver Linings Playbook beside Bradley Cooper, Jennifer Lawrence, and Robert De Niro. His performance was received well, and the cast earned major recognition. Chris hosted the BET Awards in 2013, released his first Netflix stand-up special in 2015, and appeared in Billy Lynn's Long Halftime Walk in 2016. His comeback was never rushed. He continued choosing projects carefully while keeping much of his life outside Hollywood. In 2021, that quieter path brought him back into Michael Jackson's family circle when he became an official ambassador for the Heal Los Angeles Foundation, co-founded by Michael's son, Prince Jackson. The organization works to help young people in Los Angeles by fighting homelessness, child abuse, and hunger. During the foundation's Halloween Thriller Night in 2022, Chris and Steve Harvey received the first Man in the Mirror Award. Prince presented the honor to Chris, recognizing the way he used his public platform for good. In 2023, Chris returned to the big screen in Air as Nike executive Howard White. He had known White for years through Michael Jordan's golf events in the Bahamas, which gave him a closer understanding of the man he was playing. Chris said he wrote his own scenes and gave them to Ben Affleck, who welcomed the research and details he brought to the role. The film marked Chris's first movie appearance in 7 years. He also spoke about wanting to write a book and create films that could inspire people, much like Casablanca, The Color Purple, and Coming to America had inspired him when he was younger. His career was clearly moving again, with old franchises and several new opportunities pulling him back toward Hollywood. What Chris Tucker finally revealed about Michael. But in 2026, Michael Jackson's story returned to the center of attention. 19 years had passed since Rush Hour 3, while the trilogy had earned about $849 million worldwide. Reports estimated his net worth at around $5 million, with comedy tours, residual payments, and lifestyle changes helping him regain some stability after years of financial pressure. Fans continued asking for Detective James Carter to return, and talks around Rush Hour 4 remained active with Jackie Chan and Brett Ratner connected to the project. Reports also said salary discussions had created delays, and no firm United States release date had been announced. A possible return as Smokey was being discussed too. Ice Cube had repeatedly shown interest in bringing Chris back for another Friday film, often called Last Friday, but nothing had started filming. Then the Michael Jackson biopic, Michael, reached theaters in April 2026. Critics and audiences reacted very differently, but Chris left no doubt about his own view. He said he had already watched the film twice and planned to see it again. "It's the best movie I've ever saw after Rush Hour," he joked. He called it a great movie, praised My Boy MJ, and encouraged people to watch it. His reaction did not reveal a secret medical theory about Michael's death, and Chris never claimed that it did. Instead, it showed the position he had kept for years. He would speak warmly about the friend he knew, but he would not turn that friendship into a source of rumors he could not support. That is the real meaning behind the title. Chris's account is not built around one hidden confession. It comes from the limits he placed on himself, the memories he was willing to share, and the gossip he refused to feed. Even as new movies began pulling him back toward Hollywood, his public words about Michael stayed remarkably careful, deeply personal, and unchanged. Do you think Chris Tucker was right to protect the private details of his friendship with Michael Jackson? Or should he have shared more? And which moment proved Chris's loyalty to Michael the most? Their private friendship, his courtroom testimony, or the way he defended Michael's memory after his death? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and stay tuned for more incredible stories from Hollywood's fascinating history. See you next time